Welcome to the virtual sessions of the 7th Knowledge Summit organized by MBRF and the UNDP. This is session 1 for this day, and it's called Thinking Like a Global Citizen, a Defining Moment for Global Citizenship. Before we get into the session, I would like to note to you that the interpretation from English to Arabic is available, and you can click on the headset that is on your screen in order to have access to it. Our session's topics for today are going to be the purpose and practice of global citizenship, knowledge, skills, and wisdom, and of course, learning to live together. Please allow me to welcome our guest, Libby Giles, the Director of Global Citizenship New Zealand. Libby is a specialist practitioner in Global Citizenship Education, GCED. She has set up whole school models of GCED in 2 New Zealand secondary schools, is active in the development of transformative education for global citizenship, sustainable development, and well-being. Her teaching background includes history and philosophy. Her approach to global citizenship is whole organization, philosophical, centered in responsibility. We're going to talk about so much more. Let me welcome you, Libby. Welcome to our Knowledge Summit.
Kia ora koutou. Thank you so much, Maya, for that lovely introduction, and I'm really, really grateful and happy to be here. So you've got me on my favourite topic and topics, and the parts of that topic that you've already referenced are really, really dear to me, and we can explore some of those ideas as we go through the conversation. I love the title of this session, that, thinking like a global citizen in a defining moment. These are really, really key points. If we don't get the thinking right, then we're not going to get the action right. The defining moment, I know we talk about COVID and the pandemic so much, but it is absolutely a defining moment for global citizenship. No matter how isolated we might be within our homes or in our borders, we are more connected than ever. And I hate to say it, but this is not the last disruption to be coming our way, and possibly not the worst. But yeah. So I mean, the development of global citizen, of education for global citizenship, I think is as urgent as it is exciting. And maybe what we need to be asking is, what would happen if we don't do it? But anyway.
So let's start with defining global citizenship between the what and the who. What is global citizenship versus who are the global citizens?
Yeah, I'd like to flip that around just a wee bit and talk about the who, because this is a really interesting thing. And I think, words get thrown around in a way in which we don't actually necessarily examine what those things mean, what those terms mean. And there are philosophical and political kind of, reasonings here. But if we look at who the global citizen is, we think, well, you know what, legally, none of us are. There's no world government to give us rights, to bestow the kinds of rights, citizenship rights on us. But there are, if we look at at a definition of a citizen, it's twofold. One part of it is the rights that are bestowed on a citizen by its government, and the other part is to do with behavioural characteristics. So for me, it's responsibility that gives legitimacy to the notion of global citizenship. And this is not a new idea. I mean, you have Socrates in ancient Greece talking about being a citizen of the world, or Diogenes saying, I am a citizen of the world. These people didn't go anywhere, but they knew that they were responsible for everyone and everything. So I think it's not new. The ancient civilizations and indigenous people have always had this understanding of global citizenship and being a global citizen. So that responsibility is really, really key. And I'm going to refer to that a bit more as well, because it's so important throughout the talks. So then what is global citizenship? Well, it's the act of doing. So in my newly founded organisation, Global Citizenship New Zealand, our tagline is think critically, act responsibly, live well. It covers these things. So the global citizenship is the action part of it. And I think sometimes we talk about globalization and the internet have brought us all together in ways that we haven't known before. But there is a flip side to that that means that there needs to be some questioning, some connection in a responsible way. There are actions that must kind of go with that because the other thing is that this is not about making us all the same. We are not the same. We have certain, there are certain kind of there's a certain kind of moral universalism that we all kind of, if we ask everybody what they value the most, it all looks pretty much the same, really, when we get down to it. But there's a lot of difference too. And so being that global citizen is being able to hold on to your own identity as well as appreciate your identity as a collective as well.
So, Libby, when you say we are not the same and we talk about global citizenship, how can a person, either young or of any age, from, say, a village or a city in Zimbabwe, identify with someone in New Zealand, in Austria, for example, and in Chile, for different parts of the world? How can they find a common ground for global citizenship?
Such a good question. And I think that the first place to go is understanding self. Mm-hmm. And where you are. And sometimes that might be in incredibly hands-on grassroots kinds of ways, where you might be identifying with something like a water project, mm-hmm. or so something to do with the environment or something to do with other people, but actually having that understanding of who you are here and who you are maybe in a region, and then maybe who you are in the world. You don't actually have to go anywhere to be a global citizen. It doesn't mean somebody who's on the plane all the time. You can be, right in your hometown. I'd like to, if I can refer a little bit to, there's quite a bit of work being done in New Zealand on a Te Ao Māori perspective on global citizenship. Because I think, Indigenous practice have really always had this. And it can be a really nice way when you tap into localized contexts like that. It can be a really nice way of people in other countries being able to tap into their own. Because there's not a set model of global citizenship. There are certain principles, but not a set model. So a recent document that's been produced in New Zealand around this is called Putarara, and it talks about three concepts. Te Ranga Waiwai, which is the place I stand on, Kaitiakitanga, which is guardianship or stewardship of the place and people, and Whakapuawai, which is flourishing ever forward. I think these concepts really nicely, in a very, very in a local way, represent those key concepts that you would find, say, in UNESCO's 3 domains of learning or something. So that kind of head, heart, hands. So it's a way of locally tapping into those global principles.
Okay, when we talk about that, about these global principles and the caring and becoming or understanding the wider world, even if you are in your own village, how do we implement that on education to our youth, and why is it important to start early? And even if you don't start early, can you start at any time?
So yes and yes, you can start very early, and you can also start at any time. And I think with like lots of things, the earlier you start, the better and the easier. So like learning a language, say, it's always a lot easier when you're small. There are a couple of things here. If you look at primary schools, it's a lot easier, and it's already existing in many ways too, because global citizenship education is a framework. Rather, it's not a subject. It's not something new to pop into the education system and say, here, teachers, go and do this. It's not like that. It's a framework through which you can do your teaching and learning. And it's not just for the classroom. It's outside the classroom. It's in the pastoral care. It should be in the operations of an organisation. Also, when I talk about global citizenship education, this could be any organisation. It doesn't have to be a school. It might be a business or a municipality or a government or whatever. But getting back to the schools and children, primary little children are naturally global in their view. They've got that original kind of view of the world. But of course, we knock that out of them a bit as they get older, and we put them into silos. But in primary school, the pedagogy tends to be more holistic. and the children are more global anyway. So you have that, and then you have wonderful programs that fit in beautifully. Then I can't speak for all places, but I know when I say this, people nod in agreement and they say, yeah, we have this problem. You get to secondary school and suddenly it's, oh, look, don't worry about that. And now you just do this subject and this subject and this subject, and on you go, and you get your credits, and then you become whatever. So it becomes more and more difficult because you get into a really siloed, linear, structured kind of model. And I think part of the point of this, the need for this, is that we don't live in a linear structured world anymore. It's not the industrialized world, it's the globalized networked one, which is chaotic. So it's that complex stuff that we have to get better at.
So if I may, yesterday at the summit, one of the guest speakers, John Senai, was talking about we shouldn't call it the fourth industrial revolution. We should call it the first innovative revolution, because the way that we are viewing the world is changing.
I love that. I'm writing that down. I love that. I think that's fantastic, because this is very much about opportunities as well. This is not about, it's not just about, the world's changed, so let's make some little technical changes to fix it up and carry on the way we were before. That's not going to work. We need people who can be not just critical thinkers, but creative thinkers, so that they can be coming up with new economic models, new political models, new business models, new education models, and so on. So it's providing that space to empower people to do these things.
Okay, we have a question already from our audience. I'm going to start with the questions before we move forward. So the question is, how are we defining global citizenship while there is clearly defragmentation of supply chain and mobility restrictions around? Can this be a more localization or regional focus rather?
Yes, absolutely it can, because I think the principles of I actually think it's really, really important to have, I think when because it's not globalization. Actually, this, I think that's a really
important. What's the difference? Yes, let's at least clear that out of the way.
Yeah.
What's the difference between globalization and the global citizen?
So as I understand it, globalization is largely about economic freedom to trade and do whatever anywhere. Mm-hmm. I mean, theoretically, but actually it would be true globalization if everyone could go anywhere, but they can't. But the global citizenship is about being the responsible citizen. And so, I mean, for one thing, one of the greatest challenges for globalization is from an economic point of view, there's the sort of economic priorities in globalization have meant that the environment and people have not always been looked after as they should be. So I think maybe it's kind of the corollary of it. Maybe you got globalization here, but the corollary of that, what can actually make that work is if we're responsible at the same time. So I don't know if that helps to answer this question, but I accept that most certainly this can be practiced at a regional level. And I think actually more to the point is that if we develop critically and creatively thinking responsible global citizens, they will come up with solutions to these problems. I think that's really the point here.
So why now, Libby? Why are we talking about this now? Why is this concept appearing now?
Well, it's been around for quite a while, actually, but of course it went a bit quiet with COVID. But I think that COVID is such a defining moment, and that these other kinds of disruptions, or climate change, of course, loss of biodiversity. We've got some really, really big challenges, and if we don't actually start thinking differently, also if we look at the world in a kind of the political philosophy and geopolitical developments in the world, we've moved from moving from the kind of the international stage to the global one. So what I mean by that is, inter is between. So it's relations between countries. So it's us and them, to global, which is we.
Mhm.
And so we have shared interests, whether we want them or not.
Okay.
So
So we
things
have.
like climate change or the pandemic or other biodiversity, whatever.
So we're getting some interesting questions, actually. While we are defining, since we started defining the global citizen, we have a question: is the global citizen a political or a social behavior?
Both. It can be all of those things, I think. And I think for me, I think it gives a really strong underpinning for action in those areas, but I think, you've mentioned that I'm a philosophy teacher and I've got a lot of, I think that philosophical inquiry plays a really huge role in global citizenship, because so much of our learning has lacked that kind of questioning that philosophy allows, and also ethics. So actually building ethics into teaching, because of course we can do things at an incredible rate. We're technologically so advanced that we can do things at a faster rate than we can figure out whether or not we should be doing them. And so we have these challenges.
When you mentioned the philosophical inquiry and the ethics of it, we have also a question from our audience. What is the framework that governs the creation of a global citizen?
So I think I think the framework is global citizenship. Mm-hmm. So because global citizenship itself is active in being responsible and advancing like knowledge, skills, wisdom, then it frames up a lot of the other things that we know we need in education and societal behaviour, like sustainable development, respect for human rights, cultural diversity, peace, well-being, all of these things. So for me, it's global citizenship that is the framework or the conceptual lens through which to deliver these things or access them.
So if we're going to talk about the sustainable development, how aligned are the sustainable development goals that were assigned by the UNDP a few years back with the global citizen? How do we align them, the 17 goals?
Yeah. So global citizenship is aligned to many international instruments and local instruments. So in New Zealand's case, it beautifully aligns with the New Zealand curriculum and the Bill of Rights and other, local instruments, the Treaty of Waitangi, which is the social contract of the country, and also the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, the Universal Directive of Human Rights, so on and so on. So this is a really good question to raise, because the kind of the parts of global citizenship education are often referred to, as soft skills. Well, I don't know about that, because maybe soft is the new hard, but, that's, I think they're actually quite challenging. But this is not just a nice thing to do. It's actually a requirement. And if you look at Goal 4 of the SDGs is quality education. Behind all those goals are several targets. And behind Goal 4, Target 4.7 specifically talks about global citizenship and education, sustainable development. So it actually is not just aligned, but it's a requirement. And so when you practice global citizenship, education, or, lots of other actions that tie in with the goals, you can actually be really helping your country to in the voluntary reporting process to the United Nations on achieving those goals by 2030.
Mm-hmm. So when you were talking about the global citizenship, you said there are set principles for global citizenship, but there are different models. What kind of different models are available? Are the models relevant to different areas, different places, or is it more relevant to religious and cultural privacy with global citizenship? Because this is one of the questions as well. So how do we relate those different models?
So in my perfect world, where I'm helping people to establish models of global citizenship, it shouldn't be a prescribed model, because there is so much difference, because, you know, if we look at things like the SDGs or the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, these are the things that we come up with. If we're all put into a room and say, what are the things that matter the most to us? We come up with those things generally, you know, they're very close. So there are certain principles that we seem to agree on. And the principles of global citizenship education are that it is learning that is holistic, and it's from early childhood right through school, university, lifelong learning, that it's cognitive, socio-emotional, and behavioral. So these are kind of core principles. With that framework, you can take that to any organization or country or region, school, whatever, and say, okay, let's sit down and talk about what's special to you. What are the values of your school? What's the special character of your school? And let's create your own model. Because like anything, people will something will work when people have some ownership and part of the creation themselves. I think if you just create some resource and say, here we go, this is it, you go and do this, it's not really very likely to work.
So if we're going to look at, again, global citizenship, how it's all about encouraging young people to develop knowledge, skills, and values they need in order to engage with the world. If we're going to identify this character, this person, what are the characteristics of our global citizen, the ideal global citizen?
So our perfect little global citizen person is going to be a critical and creative thinker. They're going to question. They're not going to just they're not just going to believe everything they see because they saw it on social media, or they're going to be independent thinkers. They're going to have resilience because of that. They're going to understand who they are and how they fit into the world. So they're going to have a kind of a confidence that they can meet some of the challenges and opportunities. They're going to respect other people and the environment.
You were talking about the global citizenship doesn't have to be relevant only to schools. It could be related to organizations, corporations, governments. But who is responsible for spreading the culture of global citizenship? And this is also a question from our audience.
Yeah, it's a really good question. And I think that a bit like, because we're talking about global ideas, a little bit like the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, well, who's responsible for promoting and protecting human rights? Well, we all are, because we all have them. So I think that anybody should be able to pick these ideas up and bring them to their organization. Obviously, what's really important, though, is that if it is going to be embedded in a meaningful way in any organization, there has to be support and buy-in from the top down. Because, say, in a school, or, I mean, if you can have one teacher who might be as keen as he or she likes, but if there isn't that support from the senior management and the board or whatever, then it's not really likely to last, because it's got to be sustainable. Mm-hmm. I found that in the 2 schools that I've set it up in, and what I recommend to other schools, is that what you really need to do is give it a name, a home, and someone to look after it. And then it's got a chance of being sustainable.
Okay, so this brings us to another question from our social media streaming. Does global citizenship apply to all citizens, or only some countries are responsible to do so? That's relevant to your previous answer as well, but could you elaborate on that?
I think it's for everyone. Global citizenship is for everyone. And obviously, there are going to be different challenges and different opportunities in different places. But, you know, we can be a responsible global citizenship all by ourselves in our own little world.
So I can be a responsible global citizen myself, but how can I be an active global citizen? What should I do to become more active and have a role that also supports and helps everyone else?
Yeah, so you could find out more about global citizenship and look to, if you're a teacher or so on, or you could look to embedding it in your school or in your organization and seeking support. So there are, you know, people like me out there around who are very, very happy to give advice on these kinds of things. You find, and certainly in schools, once you get the children involved, they will help to embed it, because they will get comfortable with the language very, very quickly, and the teachers will pick it up from them. I mean, there can be a real challenge to introducing things like this, because people have got very busy work lives and they think, oh, we're already doing so much. Why do we need to do this as well? Or they might say, oh, we already do that, which actually they're probably not quite. But I think having the students help to embed it is really good. And also having that, if I just step back to what we were talking about a few moments ago, that you support an organisation to embed a framework that suits them the best. But you might be responsible in your own way simply by the way you are shopping ethically and responsibly, or the way you're questioning, or on social media you'll be being a really responsible citizen if you start questioning some of the information that you see and thinking, is this real? It's again where I come back to the philosophical questioning.
So I have actually I have two questions. I don't know which one to ask first. So we're talking about being responsible about everything, but how do we define the difference between being responsible about something or making a difference about something? So being responsible in your own world, how do you take that or believe that you are actually making a difference and becoming a global citizen?
Well, there are so many ways that you can do that. I mean, I think if you can kind of get that, if you can understand that responsibility bit first, I think is really good. I think sometimes just to backtrack a wee bit on the responsibility, we live in a world where we seem quite obsessed with rights. People talk about their rights a lot, and rights are really entitlement based. But the hidden face of rights is responsibility. And, we see this again with the pandemic in terms of people's behaviors on, well, why am I, wearing a mask, or why am I getting a vaccine, or why, all of these kinds of things. So these are concepts, really tied up in rights and responsibilities. So, those are kind of areas that we can look at. How do you take that further out? In a number of ways. I mean, join groups, tell others. When you find out that some information is not true, then maybe it's your responsibility to tell others.
So also, Libby, you mentioned that becoming familiar with the language of global citizenship. So can we get like an example? What's the difference by the language, specific language for global citizenship and something else? How do we make the difference? How do we know that this is what we are addressing?
That's a good question. Well, I think partly, familiarizing ourselves with definitions around it rather than just throwing words around without any meaning. A common problem or challenge is when we talk about sustainability actually is, or like education for sustainable development, is almost exactly the same as global citizenship education. I prefer the language of global citizenship education because to me that captures the whole picture, that captures the person, the people, as well as the responsible action. And I think that most people think of environmental issues when they think of the word sustainability, even though those in the know do understand that sustainability actually does encompass all of those other things. But this is a language thing that I find the language of global citizenship more helpful.
We have another question from the audience, and it is, who is the global body responsible for safeguarding the global citizen? And are there draft laws to protect the global citizen?
What was the last part?
Are there laws to protect the global citizen?
Well, so that's a really complex issue, isn't it? And that's really why we need to become responsible global citizens ourselves. So, of course, there are a number of local laws and international laws that can protect some of our I don't want to say. Well, there are rights, but it's difficult. International laws work by treaty. They work by people agreeing with each other, countries agreeing with each other. And so this is responsible global citizenship is about, recognizing that it's that we are actually all in this together, and we've got a place to share. We've got common goods, and that we are trying to develop some kind of governance over that. There's no meta sovereign, or there's no world president. We have the United Nations is a framework that does some extraordinary work. We also know that it has some limitations because of the way that it was set up in 1945. But I think the way that we make sure that organization grows with us is that we're active. So it's a kind of it goes a bit both ways, that question. So sorry, it's not a very clear answer, but I'm afraid there isn't one yet.
So you also relevant to something you said earlier. You were talking about how we are global citizens in the pandemic and the challenge about that. And we have a question also from the audience. The question says, it seems that global citizenship during crises disappears and becomes restricted to a certain group. How do we face that?
That's a really good point, actually. And I think it's, again, it's all the more reason why we have to, recognize ourselves as global citizens. I think I get what you're saying, and I think that it's very easy in these in situations like this for some people to retreat into their own world, no matter how small that is, whether that's in their home or their country or so on, and kind of drop those collective responsibilities. But I'm kind of an optimist too, and I'm not sure that I think generally most people are on board with working collectively, and I think we see that in the pandemic as well. When we see people around the world have been incredibly compliant with restrictions put on them that they normally wouldn't, under normal circumstances, wouldn't dream of complying with.
So being an optimist, like you said, is there a difference between the global citizenship and the positive citizenship, in your opinion?
I'm not sure. I think a true global citizen is positive.
Has to be a positive, yeah?
Yeah.
How does global citizenship teach our children, or how do you bring it into education to challenge ignorance and intolerance? How do you?
Well, I think. Yeah, so I think what you do is you do that by empowering the students to understand what it is, and also you need to sort of break down some of the existing structures in schools, some of the silos that are there. I kind of step back to saying this is about supporting what's already going on in schools, not dropping something new into there. It's very, very important that you value what teachers are already doing, and in its parts, global citizenship will be existing all over the place in schools everywhere. But those threads need to be drawn together and that framework established so that it's meaningful and sustainable in itself, that it can become part of a school culture. So so that the children can make connections. I mean, quite often in schools, we're not even mapping out the curriculum, so we're not even sure what other teachers are doing in other subjects. But actually, if we have a look at what's already going on, there's a lot of connections that can be made. So more interdisciplinary learning and more linking with what's going on outside the classroom and the wider school community. So bringing in all the stakeholders, parents, staff, friends of schools or whatever, to work together. So in the most recent school I've worked in, we've had a whole school model where we've drawn together the operations with the learning and the professional development and so on. So Libby, all these things, multi-pronged.
I mean, but when we're talking about education and talking about schools, we all know in all over the world, the school environment is difficult for kids. There is bullying, there is sometimes racism. Inside the schools, there are people that look exactly the same, are alike, and they get pressured. How can a child or a student with global citizenship characteristics deal with these things and be able to be more inclusive of the people around him, or they should be able to include him or her?
So again, all the more reason, this is a perfect reason for establishing global citizenship in a school, because it's going to give children that understanding. Because of course, this is not just being about a clever thinker, it's about being empathetic and about understanding other. So that's a huge part of it. So for example, in my last school, we set up a love and diversity week every week where we celebrated love and diversity in all of its ways, and that has really grew from strength to strength, and the children, you know, really loved it, and you got groups and individuals who were able to sort of publicly talk about things that had really frightened them, that they wouldn't have been able to say before about, say, maybe something about their religion or their sexuality or whatever, that there will be, you know, lots of, so it can be incredibly helpful, empowering. And because you get student groups running who are so keen on this stuff, they love it. Students love this. So they will spontaneously set up groups and things to help to make people safe. I mean, obviously you're still going to get problems, but this is a really good way to start addressing those. And you can make it part of the culture. It's like, well, you are saying very clearly, we don't accept this stuff. We don't accept discrimination. We don't accept bullying. We don't accept any kind of, you know, disrespect for people or the environment. And that means that anybody who walks through the gates of this school is buying into that contract as well.
Again, in that sense, how do we make a difference between, say, the values and the ethics that everyone has values and ethics, and you raise your kids accordingly? How do you differentiate between those values and those ethics and being a global citizen, the values and ethics of a global citizen? Like you said, they should be merged, but what if they're not? How do we bring them closer?
Look, these things can be very tricky, as we know. I mean, this is a tricky thing with the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, isn't it? They can be like, well, but this gets into tricky philosophical stuff about, you know, is morality culturally relative, or are there certain universal things? Well, it would seem, if we think that the Universal Declaration of Human Rights are a good thing, then it would seem that there are some things that are universal, that some people, and that there are some practices that maybe we might think, maybe we need to change that practice and move forward. And when we look back in our own cultures, we can see many examples of this. Mm-hmm. We can see examples where we thought that certain things were okay, and now we know they're not, because we thought about them, we contemplated them, we thought deeply about them, and we actually figured out what the right thing was to do. So, you know, we're not there yet. We've got a lot of ways to go, but a lot of discrimination has been called out now, has been legislated against, and so on. So they are tricky. A lot of cultural practices don't have so much moral content. I mean, it's, you know, a lot of cultural practices are simply to do with language or music or dance or food, and these are simply to be celebrated. You know, these are just wonderful differences to be for us to learn from each other about.
So do you think knowing the characteristics of digital so this is a question from the audience. Do you think knowing the characteristics of digital citizen for grade 3+ is sufficient to understand the global citizen? So I think grade 3+ would be maybe 7, 8 years old, maybe less, even 6 to 7 years old, 7, 8. No,
I think I think it would be a really good start, because I don't know if we can ever say that it's sufficient, because I think it's lifelong learning. I think we're always learning about aspects of ourselves and our role as global citizens.
What resources can anyone go to in order to learn about becoming a global citizen, or actually to use those resources in order to implement them in a school or in an organization? What are the resources or the available resources?
So a really good place to go straight away is an organization called UPSEU, which is the Asia Pacific Center for Education and International Understanding. In fact, I could type that into the box. And It's based in Korea. It's under the auspices of UNESCO, and it's a clearinghouse for resources and training. And they actually run. They do teacher training. That's all been on virtual in the last couple of years, but they have had in-person things as well. So they work closely with UNESCO and have some really great stuff. So I'd make that like a number one first stop if you're really wanting to pick some things up.
Again, if we're talking about those students, is a program that's relevant to global citizenship able to help them understand or develop an argument to defend global citizenship?
I think, sorry, can you repeat the question? I didn't quite get that.
If when we are working with these students or educators in order to teach them how to become global citizens, is it something also? So is it one of the tools that you give them in order to develop an argument to defend their position as global citizens?
I think so. I think that the more they understand what it is and the more that they are empowered to question and to think, then the more easily they will just kind of naturally be able to defend that position or to be able to argue it.
Okay, and another question from the audience: what are the institutions that contribute to the dissemination of global citizenship, globally or regionally?
Oh, look, there are loads and loads, and but look, UNESCO and UpSeU would be places to go. I mean, UNESCO started, with they had a resolution in 1974 on education and international understanding, and this has really grown from its various sort of a lot of this. I mean, UNESCO doesn't own global citizenship education, but it is a global organization that has it at its heart, that prioritizes it. But I think if you start looking around, you're going to find it in all kinds of places. So various countries, but those are, UNESCO and UpSeU are really, really good places to go.
And how can this learning be taken into the real world?
Well, I think so in different ways. You take it yourself by becoming this aware of who you are and what your kind of place in the world is, and taking on challenges. But I also think that it can be taken into other organizations in a very similar way by using the framework to attaching an organization's values and strategic pillars to this kind of framework. We know a lot of organizations now are really aware that it's not enough just to have the bottom line, that they have to have social responsibility and environmental responsibility and things built into their strategic planning. But, people are often too busy to really know what to do with all of that, and that they haven't had perhaps the way that the business models that they've been set up on haven't quite allowed for that. So you might, for example, have organizations with, the Sustainable Development Goals on their wall, or saying we align to the Sustainable Development Goals, but maybe there isn't really any deep understanding of what that means for the people in that organization. So I think, supporting organizations to understand what all of this is, I think would be enormously helpful. It'd be really helpful in terms as a tool for organizational behavioral change, and for some of those issues that happen in schools that sadly still happen in the adult world, where people are discriminated against or bullied or so on. So I think enormously helpful in other areas.
Are there any steps that could be taken in order to connect the dots between the local, national, and global communities and get involved and grow this global citizenship?
I think the answer to that is kind of different for where people are at. There might already be some educational setups in your countries wherever you are, but there may not be. I am more than happy for people to contact me if they want some advice or to be put in touch with, connected with some others. I do have a number of there's a huge number of networks out there in the world working on this. There's some really, really good people working on this, which is great. And I think that's what a lot of this is about networking and working together, because otherwise it can be a bit lonely if you think that you're going to just bring this to your school or organization and other people aren't really interested. That can be tough. So connecting with others is really good.
Tough being lonely and global at the same time.
Exactly. What a dichotomy. Look at that.
So we have another question from the audience. How do you find out if you're a global citizen, and what are some of the questions that you need to ask yourself?
How do you find out if we're global citizens? Well, that's up to you, I think. I think you decide if you're going to be a global citizen or not. So some of the questions we need to ask ourselves are, who am I?
Mm-hmm.
What do I care about? Am I responsible for future generations? That's a question. Lots of kinds of questions like that I think we can ask ourselves.
So, Libby, let us know a little. I mean, we're talking about the global citizen, but let us know a little about what you have done. Global Citizenship New Zealand, exactly. What is the what was the process? Where are you today, and what do you hope to achieve for the future with this project so far?
Okay, so Global Citizenship New Zealand is brand new. So it hasn't done an awful lot yet, I'd have to say. But where we both come from, there's Professor Chris Gallivan as my colleague in this, and we have both been board members on the New Zealand Centre for Global Studies, which was set up in 2012, I think. And so that's an organisation that's kind of does a lot of research, report writing, and thought leadership with 4 program areas on, education, global governance, law, and sustainability. So we've really driven the education part of that. So that's been going along in one way, and within that we have run student conferences. And I've done had a UNESCO grant to travel and find out quite a bit of what was going on in other places. That was in 2016. Then at the same time, I've been setting it up in schools. And I have to say, when I first set it up in a school, a girls' school in Auckland, and my principal called this job, Global Citizenship Facilitator, and I didn't really know why she was calling it that. And then by chance, I saw that there was a UNESCO conference with subtitle Global Citizenship Education. So I thought, well, that sounds like me. So I applied to be in the delegation and got it and went to Korea. And what was kind of interesting was that after about a day and a half, I thought, why isn't anybody talking about global citizenship? And I realized that they were wondering what it is. And that's where lots of people still are. And that's what we have to work on together. So I kind of got more and more interested, and I got more and more involved with international organizations and could see that there was an awful lot going on out there and how exciting it is. But really how those threads need to be drawn together. And of course, COVID came along and things went flat and none of us were traveling anymore. And we were just busy staying COVID free as we could. And then last year there was a Education New Zealand had a one-day conference, and I was really inspired to see how many people came and how interested they were. Then another organisation had a forum. I spoke at that. I now work for them, and they are really working hard on embedding it in New Zealand schools, which is really great because it's actually that on the ground stuff that's really going to make a difference. There's like with many things, there's an awful lot of talk at an academic level, but we actually need to be getting on the ground. And so both Chris and I could really see that need to have a go-to place and be go-to people to find out a bit more about this and help. So we would like to support others in setting this out.
So I have a very interesting question from the audience, and really I've been thinking about it as well because it's quite interesting. Now, today, the world is going through a big change, a major change. Not only COVID, now we have the war in Europe, and how that affects the rest of the world and how it might affect the powers of the world. There's a major change in power. In that case, in case of international conflicts, how should a global citizen act?
This is really, I mean, look, if I could have a clear answer for you on this, I would be practicing thank you in Swedish, because I'd be getting the Nobel Prize, right? But I think that again, this is all the more reason why we need to be changing our thinking, because of this, this potential war is potential war, this war, and that could potentially involve, so many of the big powers in the world, it's an existential threat, of course, but it's this kind of war of the old-fashioned kind, of this sort of territorial expansion and so on, and that is so much the old world of the international relations as opposed to the global we, so it does, of course, raise all these questions too about global governance that I touched on before, but you've touched on in your question. How do you, when we've got the framework that we do with, in particular, the power of veto, then we've got difficulties in that international system for behaving in a global way. But I think that in that system there is quite a lot of desire for change, to look at it more globally than internationally. So in the General Assembly, for example, most certainly in an overwhelming response, but really complicated, really, really complicated. And that's why we have to do it, because we have to get better at the complicated.
We have to get better. I mean, that could really wrap the whole conversation up if we want to wrap it. But I still have some questions, or at least a couple of questions. What is the role of social media in spreading global citizenship? Does it have a negative role, positive role? Is it neutral, or what should its role be?
Well, it has all of those roles. And I think what we need to work on is making it, some people are just anti-social media. Well, I think, it's here whether we like it or not. So we have to use it for the best that we can. We also know that there's an awful lot of misinformation and disinformation being spread. And this is where I think it's so important to give people the skills to question what's real, and to seek truth, and then to have some responsibility on what they do with that truth when they find it out, So we know, I know a lot of you will know you're on social media, and so often people are not engaging in ideas or arguments. They're engaging in name-calling, ad hominems, false arguments. So if we can actually be educating for proper discourse, then we might have a chance of turning this sort of tide of negative social media around, because, like it or not, it's the dominant media, it's the dominant source of information now. So yeah, and the youth are quite exposed to it, and they are exposed to so much information. Does being a global citizen have any downsides? If so, what are they? Well, I think you have to always, I personally think we always have to be careful not to lose our own identity. This is not, and actually true global citizenship is about protecting that. This is not about watering down any of our own cultures or very local or regional identities. So I think there are downsides to not being responsible global citizens. I don't really see any downsides to it. The downsides are to kind of homogenization, but globalization should counter that. I'm getting confused. Global citizenship should counter that homogenization.
We keep referring to it as globalization, but we remember globalization is more of an economic
that's right.
aspect. If we talk about global citizenship, because I would like us to end the last 5 minutes on some positive notes. Main opportunities that we can see in global citizenship, what are they, and how can they help us move forward and help Mother Earth?
Yeah, exactly. So I think that if you have a focus on a true understanding of who you are and how you fit into the whole world, and that sense of we, then I think we are far more likely to have people who are going to learn in an interdisciplinary kind of a way, so that they'll be making connections, and that then they will be driven to go into careers that are about problem solving. So, like there's amazing things you can do with technology, but let's be making sure that we're doing the good stuff with it, and that we've got that ethical lens all the time. That we're not just chasing the dollar. We're actually and that doesn't mean that we can't prosper. You can do well and do good. But I think that it's, UNESCO's got this fantastic slogan, changing minds, not the climate. I think that sums up a lot of that kind of, what the global citizen can do. And that can go for things like, solutions to housing for the poor, or, to ending global poverty, or to improving the well-being and resilience of girls, or like so many things.
So I think we could there are a lot of amazing topics that you spoke to us about, Libby, but I think that we would talk about thinking like a global citizen, and a global citizen is someone who is aware and understands the world, the wider world, and the place in it, able to take an active role in their community and work with others to make the planet a better place, a more peaceful, sustainable, and a fairer place, hopefully. Thank you so much, Libby Giles, Director of Global Citizenship New Zealand, with us at the session 1, during the virtual sessions of the 7th Knowledge Summit organized by MBRF and UNDP. Thank you very much, Director of Global Citizenship New Zealand.
Thank you so much, Maya. I really, really enjoyed that, and these are the best questions I've ever had. And I just say the slogan for Global Citizenship New Zealand is think critically, act responsibly, live well. So thank you very, very much, and I hope I see you in person next year.
Same here. I hope I see you in person. Thank you, dear audience, for being with us during this session. Have a nice day.